Good evening, everyone. I call the September 26, 2022 school board meeting to order. It is 7:01 p.m. We are in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Dr. Means, please call the roll.
Ms. Munefeld?
Here.
Ms. Fraley?
Here.
Mr. Meyer?
Here.
Mr. Banger?
Here.
Dr. Hoy?
Here.
Mr. Phillips? Here. Ms. Willis?
Here.
Our first item on the agenda is our consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? I apologize. I'm out of order. Our first is a presentation of a citation from the Wisconsin Legislature to Mr. Craig Griffey. There's one more about that.
Okay, we need to do a roll call as well. Or no, we've done that. There's public comment. I'm sorry.
Thanks a village, people. Thank you all. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comments on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public agenda items this evening. Is there any non-agenda items for public comment this evening? Good evening.
There we go. All right. Thank you. Paul Fuchs, 4080 North 99th Street, Wauwatosa, Whitman parent. I unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, will not be able to make tomorrow's special meeting. So on the topic of rescinding the human growth and development curriculum, I stand before you aghast at the effort to legitimize a hate-mongering constituency under the pretense of good governance. Shame. Thank you.
Any additional public comment on non-agenda items this evening?
I didn't see the agenda, so I don't know if this is on it or not. But my name is Cheryl Hoganson. My address is 2410 North 81st Street. And I'm here asking the board to take some action on these children that are fighting in our schools. It's so unacceptable. And I think that it should be a one and done kind of a situation where if a kid is taking part in fighting, they need to be expelled, especially if they're not from our community, because this is scary. Some of these kids are on social media flashing weapons and guns and things like that. That makes me really nervous that my grandchildren are coming to school and who knows what kids have in their backpacks and what might get them riled up and they might pull it out and start shooting. I just am really concerned about all this fighting that's going on.
Thank you.
May I? That's important, please.
I think we're going to keep going with public comment.
But directly to speak to something that was said there, sir.
I understand.
Okay.
Is there any public comment online?
There are no hands raised.
Mr. Meyer.
Just to be clear, the standards, the disciplinary standards and behavioral expectations for all of our students are the same, regardless of whether they are residents or non-residents. Once they are admitted to our schools, it has always been the case that they are our children now, and everyone operates under the same rules. Just so you know, just so it's,
Not to comment on what the disciplinary standards should be or anything like that, but just to make that affirmatively clear here, that they are all our children once they enroll in our schools. And that goes without saying, but I thought it should be said. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if it does go without saying for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
So I think it needed to be said. Thank you. Sorry, we're not going to take any debate or discussion. You've had your time. Thank you. Now we are moving into a presentation of a citation from the Wisconsin Legislature to Mr. Craig Gurfey for his work to make the Wauwatosa School District one of only 3 school districts in the United States to be recognized as part of the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeship as an apprenticeship ambassador. Robin Vining, state representative, is here. I was Assemblywoman.
State Representative.
State Representative
Mr. President.
is here.
Thank you. If Mr. Gurfey would join me up here. So I am so excited and honored to be with you tonight. This is really, really, really cool. I have 2 citations. One is for the Wauwatosa School District and one is for Mr. Gurfey. And okay, so as you mentioned, the Wauwatosa School District is one of 3 in the entire nation to be recognized. Let's see, where did I go? Oh, here we go. All right. So the Wauwatosa School District's apprenticeship program into the Department of Labor's national network of employers and labor organizations, establishing a stellar foundation of connections for students interested in pursuing careers in the trades in Wisconsin is the why. And so only 3 school districts in the whole nation have gotten the recognition of the U.S. Department of Labor Office of Apprenticeship as an apprenticeship ambassador, and Wauwatosa is one of those. So we have a citation for Wauwatosa School District tonight, but it was also important to me to acknowledge Mr. Gurfey. So Mr. Gurfey built this program. He built this program, he created this program, he's nurtured this program. I was there the first signing year, correct? Yep, the first signing year, and then again this year. How long ago was the first signing year?
That was 2 years ago.
So 2 years ago, there was a signing program. And then this year, there was like a really big signing program, right? Yep. And really cool things like if you're a carpenter apprenticeship or you graduate, you get carpenter cords. Yep. First arborist, I think, apprenticeship this year.
The first youth apprenticeship for arborists.
Yep. So we're growing, we're expanding. And I think what's really exciting about this is some kids, when they graduate from high school, go to college. And some kids take different paths. And one of those paths is into the trades. And so the Wauwatosa School District, and really with the brilliance of Mr. Gurfey in partnership, has created this path of dignity for our kids to celebrate our kids who want to go into the trades. And I think that is so commendable. So we have here tonight a citation from the state legislature on behalf of Senator Kuyanga, as well as Representative Sarah Rodriguez and myself, to say thank you for your hard work and cheers to the Wauwatosa School District.
I don't have to say anything. No, this is this is very, very cool. I consider myself very lucky to be able to work in the district where I live, to be able to serve my neighbors and create this pathway for the students. And the program is growing. There's excitement building, and it's just a really fun place to work right now. So, and this is very cool. So thank you, Representative Vining.
You are welcome. We got a picture with you guys?
Yep. We'll take about a 5-minute recess quick. I want to, before we take a picture, I think the board members may have a couple words. I know I do. I think I see Leanne jumping out of her seat to want to share a few things because we've been watching you do some really creative, innovative stuff. And I think we want to take a moment to let the community know some insights into some of the things we're seeing. You're doing really great stuff. And so I want to, before we take a picture, take a few minutes so the board can share a few thoughts as well.
Well, just thank you. It's incredible the work that you've done, and we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, so I was really excited. The signing last year was one of my favorite events that I went to all year in all of Wauwatosa. The kids were so full of pride, the families, all of the businesses that were there, with their signings and their special gifts. And I don't know, it felt like the NFL draft, but for people who I need to come work at my house. And you're a new teacher to the Wauwatosa School District. You haven't been here for 20 years. And so we want you to stay. And there aren't that many people that do what you do in the teacher world. And so the fact that you're here in Tosa and you're, one time I walked in the shop and there was like 10 toilets up on, up on their platforms, kids learning how to do that. It's really exciting. And so when people say to me, oh, we're not teaching kids personal finance, I'm like, yep, that's a course kids have to take, or we're not teaching kids how to, take care of their homes or whatnot. We are teaching that, and we've got lots of opportunities. And I think we're going to keep seeing expansion to the number of kids that want to be in these classes, because like you said, Robin, college is not for anyone. And these kids are getting out with certifications, with jobs that they are going to start working and being able to contribute to the community. So thank you. Really, really exciting.
Anyone else?
Yeah. I'd also say that Mr. Griffey's influence goes beyond the classroom. In our strategic plan under number 6, we give preference to vendors that offer experiences to our students, and that's his idea. So that's the Griffey clause in our strategic plan. So just so you know where that came from, his influence goes beyond the 4 walls of his classroom.
So the first time I met you was virtually online, and you were looking for ways to creatively solve a community challenge or issue. And I keep seeing you do that over and over again. I think you were involved in doing some tables at Roosevelt for the outdoor classroom. Sometimes I give you credit for things maybe you're not doing because I just assume. I have spent time there on Saturdays watching people come in. I think there's another one coming up really soon where people can come in and use the wood shop and do some different things. Your engagement with all different people of all different ages. And I come at this from a kid who grew up in a house that my grandpa built as a home builder and as a craftsman. And so it's just I didn't get any of those talents. And so I'm always just simply amazed at the things that I see kids doing, the social media presence, the things that are shared. And parents are talking about the excitement when their kid finds, like, they found what they're passionate about. And I've heard that a lot of times and more since you joined us in Tosa. So thanks for all you do. Thanks for creating a culture around this. And it's a joy to be able to support your work.
Thank you very much.
And I'll say, Mr. Griffey, admittedly, I did not know who you were, much about this program. Being new to Wauwatosa and on the board, but I was so pleased to talk to community members who knew exactly who you were and just talked up what you're doing in the community. I come from a long line of tradesmen and women, and so I value and understand the importance of, giving our kids these skills and these opportunities so that they can go on to be successful and do the things that bring them joy. So thank you for bringing this to Wauwatosa. Thank you.
Awesome. Congratulations. We'll take a quick 5-minute recess and get a photo, and then we'll come back together. We are now moving into our consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Is there another motion?
I move to add to the consent agenda an authorization for the superintendent to proceed as discussed in closed session, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second on that?
Second.
Dr. Means, can you call the roll call for the first? I think we may have smushed those together. For the first motion, and then we'll call a roll call on the second
You
motion.
should call on the amendment first.
On the amendment, can you call the roll?
Yes. Ms. Munfeld,
Yes.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Dr. Hoy,
Abstain.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
and Ms. Willis.
Yes.
Can you call the roll call on the initial motion?
Ms. Munfeld,
The amended motion?
Yes.
The amended motion.
the original, right?
At the amended motion.
The amended motion. Do that backwards.
Do we have are we confused? Point of order. Are we doing community comment
So do we-
before we're?
Do we just amend the original motion and then?
Yes,
Yes.
we did.
Oh,
Okay, so now we're doing any board comment.
Okay.
Seeing none, any community comment on the consent agenda? Anything online?
There are no hands raised.
Dr. Means?
Ms. Munfeld,
yes.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Dr. Hoy,
Abstain.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Ms. Willis.
Yes.
And the consent agenda passes. Next up is a report on monthly staff and retention.
As Ms. Zelazowski makes her way up to the microphone, we've been very pleased with our fill rates of not only teacher vacancies. We were concerned at the start of the school year, but we filled most of all of our vacancies. And we're also had a very good start to the school year with filling substitute rates as well. So we've been very pleased. Ms. Zelazowski, the floor is yours.
Good evening. In this month's report, as Dr. Means mentioned, we are at the point when we can go ahead and lock in our employee retention rate for the 2022-23 school year. That retention rate, including voluntary resignations and retirements, is 83.2%. And looking at voluntary resignations separate from retirements, 85.8% is the rate. We will now be shifting to going ahead and starting to work towards what our retention rate will be for the 2023-24 school year as we track any changes now that we are into the school year. I have in the past several weeks enjoyed my opportunities to go ahead and meet with principals at a number of our schools. Through the first week in October, I'll finish those conversations with principals. And then in October, I'm really looking forward to going ahead and inviting some of our staff members, teachers, support staff, other positions, to having conversations with me, not only about their experiences working in the organization, but what they see as opportunities for improvement and growth, as well as the things about Wauwatosa that are most important to them and to their personal mission and vision for the work that they're doing. I think this is a really great opportunity to go ahead and provide another perspective on our employee retention and employee experience in the Wauwatosa School District. And I look forward to sharing some of those themes with you following those conversations. Additionally, later this school year, I will be scheduling what I referred to as building hours in each of our schools. So I'll be spending the equivalent of one day in each of our schools during the course of the school year. For me, it becomes a really great opportunity to see and to be engaged in the activities of our staff and students in that building. And it's also my hope is to increase my accessibility to staff members to touch base on any questions they may be having. As we think about next steps during the school year, we have a policy related to a maximum number of retirements over a period of 2 years in the organization. So I'll be going ahead and developing and confirming the list of employees who may be eligible to retire if they're interested, knowing that we're in the second year of a 2-year cap. And so we'll have a maximum number of eligible employees, teachers in particular, to retire and be eligible for the benefit that Wauwatosa School District provides. Finally, in coming weeks, as the policy committee gets into its regular meeting structure, I'll be bringing forward a number of suggestions for policies that will go ahead and help us be better able to respond to employee experiences in our organization. That relates to employee benefits in the organization, as well as how we have the ability to go ahead and add positions as we see need for to address the needs of students as well as staff members in the organization. You may recall, and for our public's information, this evening in our consent agenda, you approved the addition of a new position in the organization, a Dean of Students position that would be eligible for schools at the secondary level. So I'm looking forward with your approval of that this evening to going ahead and supporting our middle schools and high schools with that position to add to the efforts that we have for our student bodies and staff members.
Any board comments or questions? Seeing none. Oh, wait, Ms. Frank.
Can you talk a little bit about teacher retention nationally versus statewide? It's down everywhere, but it's very district specific. I mean, overall down, but it's still district specific. I'm curious. I haven't been able to find any regional data yet. It seems like it only goes back to like 2019, which feels like a whole other world. Can you speak to what you're hearing from your colleagues and sort of, I like the forward thinking that you're talking about, but where we are comparatively.
Thank you. So there are a group of Milwaukee area school HR leaders who do share information related to retention rates and other data in the area.
What's the name of the group again?
The name of the group is School Personnel Administrators of the Metro Milwaukee area, affectionately known as SPAM. Okay. Thank you for that opportunity, Dr. Means. So
SPAM, tell us.
SPAM. So as colleagues in public education, we do share our experiences, some of the trends that we're seeing. I can say that overall, what I'm seeing for our southeastern Wisconsin area is that there is across districts an increase in turnover, so lower retention rates in general. And it seems that there are some school districts increasing or experiencing a higher level than we are, and some districts experiencing a lower level. In my longer term experience, what I've seen is that districts may experience high levels of turnover for a year or 2 or 3, and then retention really climbs after that point, and not just levels out, but climbs to a point. The research that I've read in terms of looking into retention that is sustainable in an organization and still allows for growth and improvement over time, I would be looking for retention rates somewhere around 9 and 10, retention rate of around 90 to 91% in the organization. That's sustainable in terms of the support that new employees require coming into the organization, as well as allowing for a healthy amount of turnover for employees looking for leadership experiences or changing areas. But as we've started working on developing key performance indicators for our strategic plan, we're going to have a few years where we need to increase our retention to get to that point where we're able to maintain that level of a 90 to 91% retention rate from year to year.
Thank you.
I did forget one thing that I would like to share with you all. We've talked a lot in the past about the relationship between compensation and our new compensation plan for teachers as it relates to retention. This evening, as part of employee transactions, you approved a number of fairly significant components of our compensation system, one of which was part of the plan. Well, I should say that they were all part of the plan that you approved last March for teacher compensation. One component of that this evening were some longevity bonuses for individuals, teachers in the organization with over 20 years of experience. There were two payments that were specified. One was for those teachers over 20,000 or over 20 years overall, and that was $1,000 one-time payment. And then additional payment of another $1,000 was available to those individuals who had over 20 years of service in the organization and whose annual salaries are listed as less than $70,000. So that was a significant part of what you approved in tonight's very long consent agenda. A second component of the consent agenda this evening were requests that we had from staff members to reconsider their placement on the salary levels for our compensation system. And so there was approximately 30 of those requests approved, again, as part of really reinvesting in our staff members and making our compensation system internally consistent.
Thank you. I know we have put a lot of focus on making sure that we are able to have some of the best teachers and be able to retain those teachers. And I know you're resetting a lot of foundational work, and I'm excited to see the fruits of your efforts. So thank you so much for your work, and thank you for the report tonight.
Thank you.
Sarah,
do you mind staying there? I think I may need help with the presentation for the next item.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Our next item under strategic goal number 5, the first of these is a discussion and potential action regarding a proposed school board resolution to appoint an expulsion hearing panel or an independent hearing officer. A reminder for the community with kind of motions, our normal way of operating. The board about a year ago undertook a process where we usually do an initial readout and discussion and conversation on items where we don't vote, and we did that last week. This is an item that I brought forward as a motion to the board, and what we then do is we bring it back to the board for the opportunity for consideration. A motion in order to move forward actually has to be read and put forward and receive a second. If that does not happen, it doesn't actually move forward. There's no board discussion or anything else. So that's kind of the normal modus operandi of Robert's rules. So tonight, for this one, the board had an opportunity for discussion, an overview of it. And tonight, we'll consider whether or not they'll consider the motion. So for this one, I turn it over to Mr. Phillips.
Sure. It is recommended the school board approve the resolution to either appoint an expulsion hearing panel or an independent hearing officer, and I so move.
Is there a second for this item?
I second.
Thank you, Ms. Willis.
Board members, thank you for this opportunity. As we discussed last week, there are multiple reasons why we would ask you to consider looking at creating either a board panel or independent hearing officer model for our ability to deal with expulsion proceedings. Let me start by sharing that expulsion is one of the most painful experiences that an educator can ever recommend for a student and their family. And some of you have sat through those proceedings. They're devastating. They're really hard to be part of. It is a life-altering moment to sit with families. And I think that was expressed really clearly by our board last week. And I do appreciate you highlighting that this is something that we should not take lightly. I'm going to just ask Ms. Elizosky to go to the next slide, if you could. I want to start by grounding ourselves in our strategic plan again. And as a connected community, inclusive community, we're active advocates in providing equitable access to excellent academic, co-curricular, and social-emotional learning opportunities that empower every student to thrive as passionate, productive, and creative citizens. Now, you may look at this mission statement and say, why are you discussing this about a potential expulsion panel? But I think the board, in your own words last week, expressed the fact that even students who have made some tough decisions that we may not agree with, even they deserve active advocates who are going to ensure that they have equitable access to an excellent academic, co-curricular, and social emotional learning opportunities. At the same time, your charge as the board is to ensure that every child has access to it. And if there are students who are impeding that process, then you are called to act. So I think grounding ourselves in the mission statement is actually really appropriate. Thank you. So what are some of the options in front of the board? According to Wisconsin state statute, and the statute is 119.25, and then it goes into parens 1 and 2. The board has the right to establish either an independent hearing officer, to appoint an independent hearing officer, or to appoint a hearing panel. Now, a hearing panel can have a number of different board members on it. It could be a hearing panel of 2. It could be a hearing panel of 4. Our recommendation is that the board consider a hearing panel, and this is candidly after listening to you, and I appreciate the direction you provided last week, but having a hearing panel of at least 3 members that would be part of this process. I think the powerful part of having a 3 board member panel, it doesn't preclude you from having a quorum or more of the board attend a hearing if that's the availability of the board. But I think it does create a level of consistency. During my 13 years as a superintendent and 22 years as a district administrator, what I've seen is that often school districts are reactionary to expulsion proceedings. And so we put out polls and we ask who can show up. How many of the 4 can show up for a hearing? If you have a hearing panel, it's the equivalent of a committee. And those panel members have the ability to really dig in and understand the process of a hearing, and they become, in essence, the consistency of normalizing how the board / the district will respond to hearings that come before them. I think that's a real strong opportunity for our district. Thank you. But I think there's some other advantages. And I think last week we didn't do a good job. And I feel still not as adequate in this as Mr. Pinion, who is our leader in this space. He's ill this evening, so he regrets not being here. But I think one of the messages that we conveyed, which was not an accurate message, was that we were trying to expedite these hearings. Let me kind of explain why the timeline is really important and try to do it one more time. If 2 students engage in a behavior that requires a potential expulsion proceeding, the process starts by administration identifying the behavior and suspending up to 5 days. That's the maximum amount of time we can suspend without having an expulsion proceeding associated with it. What we're finding, due to a lot of other administrative challenges and tasks that our principals have, that investigation isn't completed on day 1 of the suspension. In some cases, it's completed on day 3 or day 4 of the suspension. And so what you have to do within those first 5 days is have an administrative hearing to determine if the behavior is egregious enough where it requires an expulsion proceeding. What we're finding is that we're having those hearings, that administrative hearing on day 4, or in some cases, day 5 of the suspension. And when you go beyond day 5, while there's loopholes and you can work around it, ideally, you should honor the due process of the students and tell the family either we're going to pursue an expulsion or the student can come back to school. And I think that's the angst. I wouldn't call it rush, but that's the angst that we're finding ourselves administratively in, where once we get to that day 4 and the hearing is held, we decide that the behavior is egregious enough where it deserves an expulsion. Now you're in a process of having to find a quorum of 4 board members. And some board members are very diligent about being able to flex and to be at those hearings, but we've tried to schedule other meetings to try to gather 4 board members for anything is difficult. So that's the concept behind this. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I believe that there's another advantage. And the other advantage is that when you sit in a very serious, semi-formal court proceeding, because in a expulsion proceeding, there's a court reporter there who's transcripting everything. There's an attorney there who, in essence, serves as an administrative clerk for the board to make sure we're following the rules. That's a very intimidating process for a family. And when they're sitting among all 7 of you, it gets even more daunting. Mr. Pinion and I talked about the concept of, if there's a smaller panel, it feels more intimate. It doesn't feel as accusatory, as judgmental as it would feel with a full board. There's other advantages to this process as well that we would point out to you, and I won't read those to you. I'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. It's been brought up that when you review our statutes, the Wisconsin statutes, and when you also review our board policies of 5610, which is suspension and expulsion, 5611, which is due process, and administrative guideline 5610, they're not all in alignment. And Dr. Jessup Enger and I had a chance to talk with legal counsel this afternoon, and legal counsel acknowledges that and we've talked about the fact that we need to clean up a lot of our administrative language in terms of administrative guidelines and policies. It's acknowledged that there's conflicting language between our due process language, which states that due process requires someone to go before the full board, versus 5610 in the administrative guidelines.
And I believe it just says before the board.
And it just says before the board. So it's interpretation. I mean, you could make the argument that per the Wisconsin statute, the board could also mean a hearing panel, but we believe it's cleaner to clean up the language and to make sure that there's true alignment. So we know that there's work to do in terms of our policy and administrative guideline language. Did I cover everything there?
My takeaway is we have a state statute that's the umbrella that provides us the opportunity to consider this motion. We have a board policy that articulates that the board should be doing the hearing. We have administrative guidelines that explain how the policy is enacted, that says and provides a pathway to, again, referring back to the state statute, that we could choose an independent hearing officer or a panel. So that's where we've got 2 that point one direction, 1 that doesn't say it cannot, but it does not articulate clearly that it can. Legal counsel, again, says, if we moved forward with this, it would behoove us to clean up our policy pretty quickly on that. But they said, yep, these 3 things all point on, there's not agreement within the policy as it's written. So something to consider.
The last thing I would say, and then I would open it up for your questions. I've sat through many proceedings I've had more students return from an expulsion than students never return from an expulsion. And I think the community needs to know that. I think veteran board members know that that's how it typically works. There are instances where students can be expelled for a semester or a year and they return. One of the words that I would just ask us all to consider is restorative as we think about an expulsion process. And our ability to meet the needs of students, I think it starts with the culture in which we're even engaging in these discussions. If you have a culture in which the proceedings isn't, again, very procedural and code, yet it's nimble and it's able to meet the needs of families. When we talk about the restorative side of it, if a student returns, we want them to return in a way where they don't feel it's an us versus them or they've been wronged, but there was a process that respected who they were, respected that there was a mistake made, and there was a path to restoring their way in our school community. I like to always say that there aren't any bad kids. There are students who make bad decisions. And if we can continue to focus on that, that will be helpful. We're not going to discipline our way out of our challenges that we have in front of us right now. We can't expel and suspend our way out of it. There's a balance that we need to strike. And part of that balance is being able to act when we have to. And that's why this recommendations before you this evening.
One thing I would add, because there's several questions I got from the community on this item that I suspect the board may be curious about as well. The intent, and I think it's fair to look at the resolution and consider, is this actually the case in each of your own individual minds? The intent of the resolution was not to curtail any due process rights for students. It was to shift who was presiding and ultimately deciding over the expulsion hearing. But all due process rights, process timelines would all continue. There would be no changes to any of that. And again, it's up, like I state that, and you may disagree and may point holes in that, and that would be totally fair and reasonable. But that was certainly the intent of writing it. So I would open it up for board comment and question. Wait, Dr. Means, is that it?
Yes.
Yes, sorry about that. Any board comment and questions? Mr. Meyer.
Please, will you help me understand how we're proposing to do this? We have a motion on the floor now with a second that says expulsion hearing panel or an independent hearing officer.
I can amend it.
So you're right. That's what you had. So it's all there for discussion now. Yes. And if in the course, just so I'm understanding, right? Just in the course of discussion, if we start to see that the discussion is going one and not the other, then you can ask to entertain a motion to eliminate the other and stick with the one. Is that where I'm hearing? Oh, okay. All right. Just wanted to be sure I understood this. So to add to what the president said about expulsions, it is typical in an expulsion to say, for example, well, students, you launched a rocket to the moon and came back, and we don't allow that. So we're going to expel you until age 21. However, we are deciding to hold that expulsion in abeyance. And if you do a moon launch again, it only has to go to administration, to an administrative hearing, and does not have to come to the board again. It's like you're on good behavior now. You did this. This is an expellable offense, but we're going to let you stay as long as you don't do it again. If you do it again, it doesn't have to come back to the board. We just have to prove, not just, that you did it again. And then, so if anybody's looking for expulsions and students are gone, typically that's not how it goes, because we do want to try to redeem children. That's our job, is to teach. Okay, So with that, if I have a question, it says, if we go the hearing panel route, it says the hearing panel may rotate members upon action by the full Board of Education. Does that mean that the initial appointments have to be approved by the Board of Education? And any changes to the panel of three has to be approved by the Board of Education? And how or are we saying that there'd first be an appointment and then you see what I'm not clear on exactly what we're saying here, just so I know. Okay, thanks.
It depends on how the board wants to proceed. My recommendation in terms of language would be that you identify 3 board members who will be the panel with an alternate
or
this evening.
This evening. Okay. And we're saying that those 3 are expected to be there every time, or are we saying we need 2 of the 3 to have a quorum of the 3? The 3, all 3 have to be there.
Yes.
Every time. Well, what if a 4th board member is available? Can the 4th board member attend?
Yes.
And is a voting member of the panel when attending? Just trying to understand.
My question.
I believe that it is, if you're going to appoint a panel, it would be inappropriate to have people come in and out of the panel. I think board members have accessibility to attend the hearings, but the panel is the panel. They're the ones who vote. According to state law, the full board must ratify the opinions of the panel 30 days after their ruling. So the full board gets to have the ability to weigh in formally 30 days after the ruling of the panel. It may behoove board members to actually attend the hearing so you can hear it for yourself versus reading a transcript. And I think that's the advantage of having, if you are available, that you come in and you attend. You can hear it for yourself. You can be in the room and sense the emotion of it. But I think in terms of process, my counsel would be that the panel is the voting body.
So that assures continuity from hearing to hearing, that all 3 have to be there. Now, law of unintended consequences, do we figure that we can actually, on naming 3 members, that those 3 will be available sufficient dates so as not to obstruct timely process? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. I believe that what would happen moving forward is that Ms. Hoppy, who works in the Student Services Department, would have the ability to forecast a month ahead. So we're in late September now. Ms. Hoppy would call the 3 panel members and say, what are your available dates in October? And so now Mr. Pinion is working around those dates versus the way we operate right now, which is the hearings are coming to us and we're reacting. So this is I believe, a more proactive approach to being prepared for hearings if we need them versus being reactionary.
And the absence of a transcript, how important is that?
I think having a transcript is critical. This board, now there's some districts that do not hire court reporters. I have never worked in a district that doesn't have a court reporter in this expulsion area. I believe that that's best practice. You should definitely continue to do so.
Okay. It says, upon request, the hearing panel shall direct that a transcript of the record be prepared and then a copy be given. So does someone have to request the transcript for there to be a transcript, or is the transcript the standard?
The transcript is not automatically provided to the family unless they request it.
But there will be a transcript.
There is a transcript created for every hearing that we have. And there's a copy of it in our district office.
Okay, I misunderstood that. So there's always a transcript.
Yes, sir.
Of this three person panel, there will be a transcript.
And that's why the transcript's important. If you move to a 3-person panel, it's important for the other 4 members when you have to ratify the actual ruling of the panel.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
So I will start by saying I think this is probably one of the most delicate, intimate issues that come before us as a board. I'm the one that brought up due process for students. And I'm still just not comfortable that a committee constitutes the board. And, I realize and understand that our policies are a little messy and haven't been updated in some time. But on this issue alone, I think it's imperative that we get it right. We haven't had expulsions regularly in years. I think one in the past 5 years, if I'm correct. And I really think that we need to do our due diligence to ensure that we are giving students every opportunity of due process. And I think part of that is, as it stands now with our policy coming before the board. I know it gives us some more flexibility of having 3 rather than 4, but I think we are a dedicated group of board members and, based on our availability that, having a quorum of the board is more sufficient than having a panel of 3. I mean, and until we clean up the policy, I'm not saying, my personal opinion would be to clean up this policy and then revisit this motion. I think when we're talking about taking a student's free and appropriate public education away from them, from our district, we have to be very careful in balancing all of these things.
Okay, give a question.
Thank you. Well said, Ms. Willis. As you all know, I had many comments at our discussion, and my sentiments remain the same. I appreciate that the superintendent has brought this to us. I also would be more comfortable with it if we had our policy changes ready, if we all, as board members, have experienced expulsion hearings. And that's just, and to me, it's important. And again, I spoke quite a bit at the last meeting. And again, my opposition to this resolution is not because I don't think it could work in the future. It's the timing for me and the importance and the catastrophic nature of expulsions for everyone, including the family. And it's a serious thing when students and their families come before the board. It's an elevated, and it should be elevated. This is their public education, and we have to weigh that against the safety and security of our entire student body. So it's of utmost critical importance to me that our board is directly involved in this process. I did have a question about if this possibly this committee was formed. Would all 3 members have to vote in favor of an expulsion, or would it just be the majority of the 3? So
that's why there's a recommendation for 3. Because there should be a majority of the 3 to.
So 2 out of the 3 must.
There should be an odd number.
And then I had one other comment. I'm sure I'll think of it.
So let me just ask procedurally, if there was a quorum of 4, how would that work with voting?
You'll be there longer.
So we deliberate.
So I mean, for those of you who have been part of expulsion hearings, you're there longer, and you have to come to a majority. And there are times where it's a 2-2 split, and you spend the time getting to a majority.
Can we go back to the 5 days? So it's 5 school days, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the idea that it would be 3 of the same people, I think for me is the stumbling block right now, because even if Mrs. Hoppy said, okay, Leanne, Mike, and Sharon, what's your availability? We would have to have the same available day. Not the same day every week, but we'd have to have the same available day week after week after week. Because I'm doing if they get suspended on a Thursday, it would have to be figured out by the next Thursday. If it happened on a Tuesday, you know what I mean?
if the only time we could get together was the following whatever, it could be day 5. You know what I mean? And
Well, once you exceeded the 5 days and there's a decision to move forward with the hearing, then you have an additional 10.
right. But I'm literally thinking about trying to get 3 people the same days, week after week. Like, I'm just sitting here being like, I don't feel like I could in good faith put myself in as a person to do it, because this week alone, I wasn't available for Wednesday because I have another volunteer commitment to the district for 3.5 hours. Right. And I don't know. I appreciate that you raised the fact that this is not about accelerating expulsion. It's like, let's just be clear on that. But 2, I don't know if this is going to solve the challenge. B, I absolutely agree with Ms. Neufeld and Ms. Willis in terms of like from the level of importance. I can look at all of you and know that you will do your best to be there, right? And so we were able to get 4 for everyone. No? I saw 4 on the 28th.
Well, my availability has changed with this conference being canceled, but I recognize that that's going to be an issue in the future. But I think
I thought we had 4 for
No, and
I think I can
when
be the
you
4th for any that wasn't.
and I think when you talk about 4 of the 7, that there's a low layer of complexity that comes along with it.
scheduling. Yeah.
And again, we're okay either way, however this proceeds. We wanted to offer options, but we also we felt that we were being reactionary. One of the comments that you shared with us is stop being reactionary, try to be proactive. And one thing that school districts who have either a panel or an independent hearing officer, when these issues emerge or they typically come in waves. It's just the nature of being in a school. Now, instead of reacting, and there's like this tense energy that overcomes all of us, we could be proactive and say, here are the days that we have available to us. That way we're more nimble for the families, we're more nimble for everyone involved.
So can I ask a couple follow-ups? So one of my questions goes back to something you said. So if it was 3 people, the same people, and an alternate, that alternate could go in. Does the alternate have to stay the same?
What do you mean by alternate? It's not that in here. I just wanted to.
Right. Dr. Means had said earlier that ideally, 3, so it's odd, but that there could be an alternate person. And I guess I'm questioning does it have to be the same alternate or because I hear on the consistency thing and.
So you mean like I have a jury in a criminal court and I have 12 jurors and I have 2 alternates?
Yeah.
So I have 14 people listening in case for whatever reason I lose one of the 12.
Available, but the alternate.
So there would be a 4th board member, but the 4th board member always have to be the same board member.
That's what I'm asking. Is it always the same? I'm just saying.
It doesn't always have to be there, but would be there if one of the 3 wasn't available.
I think one of the issues that haunts school districts is the inconsistency of the rulings at hearings. And when you have a group of board members who they get, and I hate to say this, but they get good at listening to what does the law say? Is it appropriate to have the expulsion for a semester? I've seen expulsions last a week. So I've seen it. I've been part of them. And so you have at least a pace and cadence around what is acceptable for an expulsion and what's not. And when you have people come in and out, that becomes a challenge.
So that goes to my struggle that I wanted to address to Ms. Willis's point. If I have 3, if we have 3, then they always have to be there. It's always the same 3 and it's consistent. If we don't like it, we can replace them or we can we do the board review within the 30 days and we don't like what we're seeing for outcomes, we can replace, a majority of the board can replace, one of the three who isn't consistent with the will of the majority of the board. Okay. But if we go with quorum of 7, you might not always get the same 4.
It's actually you
Unlikely.
won't.
Yeah.
It's unlikely.
Yeah. And I'm retired. I will likely be there. Now, you all, nobody knows how I really, except maybe Mrs. Mufeld, what my perspective is in these meetings. I will say I spoke of redemption here. So, but you still won't know which 4 are going to decide if it's down to 4, if we have to have the hearing. So you might lose consistency with the quorum of the 7 as compared to must have the 3. I'm struggling. I don't know. I'm only trying to point out the struggle I have about what's the better way to go.
I'm not trying to convince you. My last comment to you would be this. This actually provides more input from the entire board than what you currently have.
Yeah, I agree.
Because right now, if you get a quorum of the board, you have the hearing. If the other 3 aren't there, they're never even part of the process. If you have a panel, now at least within 30 days after the hearing, the entire board has to weigh in and be responsible for what's being presented to the full board. So candidly, it's actually involving the board more than less. It's actually one of the things that I want to make sure you have the ability to weigh in on is this very serious issue of expulsion in front of children in our schools. This model actually ensures that the full board is part of it. There are instances where if you have 5 of the 7 available, the 2 board members who aren't able to be there, they'll never know what occurred. They're not in the room as we've discussed why it's so important. And that happens often.
So I guess I'm really struggling with this. I think everybody is. Because what I'm hearing is, if anything, we would be maybe considering the hearing panel. I agree. I don't like the idea of a hearing officer. I think it needs to be somebody from the board. You need to sit in front of a student who goes to your school, who's part of your community, to make that decision. I'm like Leanne, I really can't imagine that I could be on a panel like this. I just don't have the flexibility in my schedule. So I think one of my questions is, do we even have 3 people who would step forward and say, I'm willing to be one of the 3? And then I guess my second thought would be, if we have 3, or even if we don't, even if we have all 7, is there some education? Is there something we can do to prepare for this? Because what I'm hearing and what I've been kind of doing a little bit of research on online is there's a lot of flexibility in how this is done. And there's a lot of creativity in the way that some boards proceed with expulsion hearings and holding some things in abeyance or having certain criteria. But at this point, for the most part, this is a board that has very little experience in expulsion hearings. And so jumping in and suddenly having 10 in front of us without really having any education in how to do this feels unfair.
Yes, and it's drinking from a fire hose. There's no doubt about it. I think when you consider some of the challenges and opportunities in front of us with student behavior in some of our schools to start the school year, it's accelerated our need to have this conversation. Ideally, we're not having this type of conversation so soon into the school year. In terms of professional learning for the board, yes, there's clearly opportunities to have legal counsel come in and share with the board what is a hearing and what's your responsibility and what's your flexibility and latitude that you have as a board. Those are all opportunities in front of us.
Dr. Hoyt. one of the reasons, and I lean towards preferring the independent hearing officer because of both, I believe, a sense of consistency and a sense of training and expertise in this. I don't prefer them for all the reasons that everyone said. This is one of, I both brought the motion forward and I'm conflicted on it. The board will start the year doing hearings. So no matter what, the first several hearings that we would be doing, this board as a full board would do those.
We had a quorum of the full board.
A quorum of the full board.
That's how we're going to start. Okay.
Yep. So any decision we make tonight would not be enacted immediately for a variety of reasons. But I'm conflicted on that one. I think there's a lot of really good perspectives. Other board points, questions?
Can you help me understand, given the timeline, how you can be proactive? Let's say, is it a save the date kind of a thing to say, hey, in October, November, committee save these 2 dates every month, or is that how that works?
Yes.
Like, how do you, like, I'm just understanding how tight the timeline is. How do you be proactive?
If we could strategically have the panel save dates, but then the calendar, then we are able to work around those saved dates versus us going out and making cold calls in essence and asking who's available. And now people, and I think board members are very loyal and committed people. They'll adjust, they'll cancel certain things. And some people won't, and some people can't. And so I think that's what I meant by the proactive side of things.
And then within 2 weeks-ish, you'll know whether there will be an event. And so those 3 could be released.
Absolutely.
At that point.
Yes.
Yeah, am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. I just wasn't sure how the proactivity worked. Okay.
So if this motion passes as a panel, but there's not 3 people that can commit to being on this panel, do we defer to an independent hearing officer or do we defer to the quorum?
I think you go back to the quorum, which would be ironic because if you can't even find the 3 that can commit to being the panel, then that just highlights, I believe, the complexities of finding a quorum.
I just wanted clarity on.
Sure, but I appreciate the question. I've thought about that question too of, okay, what if you can't get 3 people who can lock in and commit to the dates? Then you're back to the typical way that most school districts in Wisconsin do it, which is it's more reactionary. And then you're hoping that people can make the adjustments in their personal and professional calendars midstream.
And is there a term for this panel?
It's for 1 year. The statute states that you can only do it for 1 year.
Be through the end of this
It's
academic
through
year.
June 30th of 2023.
And what happens in the case that somebody is on the panel that does not get reelected or run, into this school year?
I think that's part of the strategy the board would have to consider and sensing who will be the 3. So you have some backup.
Thank you. I remembered my question. So I think, for the community's sake too, this has been a little bit confusing based on some of the comments we've received. So there are 2, maybe more, but generally 2 instances where students may return to this district: expulsion and abeyance and conditional readmission. Those are 2 very different procedural areas where students might possibly have an expulsion and be back into the district. So I guess with that said, even consistency, I'm questioning that because over time, the administration will bring recommendations to us for expulsion and then change a little bit their philosophy and how they're bringing them forward for the board's consideration. So obviously, because I'm unable because of, having to make a decision in the actual expulsion hearing, I'm not able to explain a lot of these nuances. But just to say that board members don't always decide that sort of understanding. It's the administration who brings the expulsion forward, and the board members have, yes, a statutory action to answer questions whether or not the student should be expelled based on the notice that has been given to them and their guardians. So, however, I'm not sure if I eloquently stated that or not. It's not an eloquent process. It's very serious, and
it's customizable. I mean, if you're not customizing it to each situation, then you're not showing the level of empathy that is necessary. I think you did say it well. And I think you're raising a point that we would be remiss if we don't mention it, because there's been this narrative of the board hasn't done its job. I think what I'm hearing you say is that the board can only do what's presented to the board. So if there's questions about the past, it's not, I don't know if that's, I'm speaking from the administrative side, not the board side. It's just, that's not a totally fair judgment on the board of the board, because you can only respond to what's presented to you.
So I agree with Mrs. Muehlfeld. I agree with you, Mrs. Muehlfeld, that in the past, administration has changed its cultural philosophy on what level of a given type of offense to bring to the board. And administration became stronger without the board actually talking about it. And then administration became less strict without actually talking with the board about it. So the level of expulsions changed as far as what came to the board without the board ever weighing in. And, I'll try to think of some example that has nothing to do with students. If there's a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit out here, do the police ticket you for 30 miles an hour or 35 miles an hour? Well, the police chief can decide where to start issuing tickets, and the judge at the civil court has nothing to do with that. So that has happened, particularly in the area of drug offenses, where we've changed the cultural standard about what we will bring to expulsion, what we won't. And in those cases, it gets risky if the board superintendent relationship doesn't have a culture of the superintendent bringing those questions about norms to the full board, and just hearing a couple board members and then changing behavior and not the whole board having a chance to weigh in on that. So and a second way to explain what I think Mrs. Muehlfeld was trying to explain. Mrs. Muehlfeld, am I making sense to you? And in this, I'm saying I agree with you, but maybe I didn't say it the right way, and I'm not. I don't know.
Well, I was really trying to answer Dr. Hoyt's question as well about training, and every case is going to be different, and
That's true.
And the situations will be different. The evidence will be different. Again, you're in the room making a decision at the time, because that is the requirement by law. The idea that board members can't find out what has happened at an expulsion is false. You certainly can have information about, generally the expulsion order, as far as I understand, even if you are not the board member at a hearing.
But this strengthens it even more in that the full board has to vote on it 30 days after the hearing the hearing panel's verdict. And so that's different. So yes,
Right.
if you have 4 board members at a hearing and one of the 3 that weren't there would like to know what happened, of course, that's available. But this takes it to a different level in that those 3 board members who weren't there, they have to educate themselves on what the actual hearing was about, because they're going to be expected to vote on it.
Well, and it makes a difference because we know people talk in schools, and as you know, people find out. And the administration, again, that's why it's sensitive. So, yeah.
And the only other, I think Mr. Meyer raised something that I've seen as best practice done with other boards, and that is at least on a semi-annual basis in an open session, or you can have it in however you want to do it. But there's a checkpoint where you discuss how many hearings have we had? What are the trends? And then that's when the board, and this is what I've been sharing with board members, I appreciate. And that's where you challenge the administration to say, so what are you doing in terms of interventions? What are you doing in terms of preventive things to get us here? What are some of the other options available to students other than just simply bringing them before the board? Last week we discussed this, and we haven't brought it up this evening, but I think we can't avoid this. We haven't created a lot of other options other than expulsion or bust. And that's a failure on the system, that we haven't created other opportunities for students. And so what's happening currently in the system is that if there isn't an expulsion, those students don't have an alternative school to attend, or they don't have other interventions that can help them restore themselves and redeem themselves. And I think that's part of the frustration as well. So I've been saying in the public, and I think our messaging around this has to be balanced. It's not about just kicking kids out of school. That no one wants to do that. Discipline is not just punishment. Discipline is also an opportunity to teach. And so I appreciate the board saying we don't want to advocate our authority, our role in that teaching opportunity. We don't want you to be out of it either. We just want to make sure that it's part of a structure that is going to be beneficial, efficient, and proactive for all.
I just have one other question. The ratification process, can you tell me more about that? Because what would that look like if possibly a quorum of the board did not ratify?
So what the statute states is that the ruling of the panel stays in place until the board votes. If the full board has the ability to affirm the decision of the panel, modify it, or reject it.
But is that happening in open session?
Yes. Now, I think you can. I think you can and should have the ability to pursue and explore a closed session opportunity. Yes, you can always do everything in open, but I think there's opportunities. This is one of the provisions that allows you to talk in closed session.
Okay. So thank you. I would have a concern with that because it is difficult enough for this process for any students, their families, and all involved. And that to me would create more issues.
So, and I know tomorrow we may have the opportunity to talk about committee structures. A component of any committee structure is a level of trust among the board. And so it doesn't matter if it's the policy committee or the finance committee or a hearing panel, there does need to be an element of trust that the board, the hearing panel has enough trust among the non-hearing panel members to say, no, they did their history. They did their true background and knowledge, and they know what discussing here. So what's before us, I think it would be a pretty rare situation for the full board to reject what the panel is presenting, but you have to have trust among the full board to not only for this to work but any committee structure to work. It's a good point.
Thank you.
I'm trying to get a sense of what I'm hearing from the board. There's been a variety of different things. The original motion articulated an independent hearing officer, which I think I am the only one who's articulated any interest in that option. Fair enough. A panel of 3 of the board. A good discussion on several folks who've said that they have an interest in this, but have some discomfort with until the policy level is cleared up of not instituting this, and a desire for the full board to have a opportunity to be in a couple hearings so that the full board, and I think to some degree that is a building of trust too, of like having gone through it, understanding it will benefit the board as they're considering it, even if they're not on the panel. Then there's some logistical challenges of, are there actually 3 people who can sit in this role?
Before, right? Because we would need an alternate that was committed for the year as well.
I feel like 3 need to be really committed and the alternate needs to be almost as committed, right? But point taken. Dr. Means.
Again, not trying to convince you one way or another. After listening to this very robust and good conversation, perhaps the next, I'll modify my recommendation to, we'll come to the policy committee and align all of our policies and allow whatever hearings that need to occur. Let's continue to use the traditional process we have. And then once those policies are aligned, you can re-examine this as a group. It gives people who haven't been part of these processes to have exposure to it. It gives us more time to just think about this a little bit more. Because I think, again, I want to guard against, there's this perception that we want to fast track this. We don't. We just want to get it right. And we think that there's benefits to this. So I'm modifying my recommendation based on the feedback and direction you've provided this evening.
Now, is there an opportunity here to withdraw the original motion?
I mean, you came to us for assistance, right? And I'd like to accommodate that and at least see if there's 3 people interested. You know, I don't take that very lightly.
We need this,
and so I respect that you did prioritize that. You did ask for help from us, and so I'd love to even just see what's feasible. If the board is willing to do that, see if there are 3 people with an alternate that are willing to at least entertain the request for assistance, and if not, then we go down the. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But I don't know if you all agree. I would like to at least see. But if not, that's okay too. Just me.
Should we take community comment on this and then we can vote?
Well, what are you saying again?
If there's 3 people that are able and willing to accommodate, I think even before we make a recommendation, it's like, is it feasible to make to vote on a recommendation if we don't know if there's 3 people?
And also you could entertain a motion to table until such time as the superintendent comes forward with a modified plan, for example. That would kill it.
I think his request for assistance is timely.
And
time sensitive. So I
agree.
If we have the ability to do it personally, I'd like to try. And if we don't have 3 people that can at least assist, or then we're done, right? We're dead in the water.
Yeah, I just don't want to kill it when we know there's a need. So I'd like to leave the door open.
Yeah.
Even if it's not going to pass tonight, I'd like to leave the door open for future discussion. I'm agreeing with you, Mr. Phillips, about the urgency here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. This has been helpful. Are there 3 individuals on the board? I'll just go around. Ms. Willis, is this something?
I'm interested, but I will say that I want to prioritize aligning these policies and aligning them with our strategic plan before we move forward. Even if that's something that we do next week, if that's something that our policy committee is able to undertake, and then, we vote for the table this and vote for this at our next meeting. But I am interested.
Mr. Phillips,
I don't think that I can.
Dr. Hart,
Unfortunately, no.
I am not able to.
I can. Yes.
I can.
Yes, I am interested.
Number 3.
So we have the 3 on the panel and we have the 3 committed, and then
I'll just say, I think the alternate thing is like a little more open, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only because my term will end in April
Yeah.
and, you know, all those sorts of things. And I appreciate your raising this, Mr. Phillips. I really appreciate that you brought us some
Right.
options. And while I couldn't do the hearing officer, I like the idea of, you know, consistency rule, et cetera. I just want to make sure that
And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity and the freedom, the professional freedom to bring to you something that's uneasy.
Mhm.
And it's uneasy for me to ask you something that isn't easy. So I apologize for that. And I'm always looking for a compromise. And I appreciate you, Mr. Phillips, saying, no, wait a minute. You came to us because you need help. The district needs help. And that's my foundation.
Yeah, bring us around.
Is there an alternate pool? I'd be happy to be in an alternate pool.
I mean, that's where I think it gets
We have that flexibility. I'd be supportive of that approach.
can I ask for a motion to table this and ask the policy committee next week to take a look at the policy. Dr. Means, you and I may take a look at slightly adjusting, and we'll bring back to our very next board meeting. Again, we're already under kind of I have a sensitivity to that this being timely and wanting to figure out how to kind of get this right. It allows us to land the policy. We are already scheduling out this initial burst of hearings is underway. I don't know if that meets the need.
Can we ask if that alleviates any short-term pain, or would it really behoove us to try to take some action tonight? Because you know what I mean? Because
right.
We'll be sick.
And I also ask you this, with my availability this week and into next week that I didn't have, does that help and give us a quorum to proceed with the hearings that we already have scheduled?
I can take a look. No, it doesn't alleviate the pain, but I would just share with you, I believe legal counsel would smile upon your recommendation, Dr. Jessup Anger, of tabling this, allowing the board policy committee to get things right and then bring it back to the full board for your vote. And that way, I think we don't have conflicting language between certain policies. We're aligned. I think we've done a lot of good work in identifying at least who the 3 would be. So the pain that's there right now is pain that's always there. I don't know if this would alleviate it.
So we push her, Mr. Phillips' statement of we need to recognize the urgency or we wouldn't be here.
Right.
We could pass this tonight and have it be in effect until the policy committee can come back with a recommendation. And if the committee of 3 never meets, wonderful, so be it. But at least we're at the ready to proceed. We'd all understand that would be the committee of 3 until it's not. But we'd have a safety valve available for Dr. Means. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just trying to put out.
Theoretically, how quickly would this panel get to work on the hearings that are already scheduled? Would they even have input into those, or are we scheduling out to October?
We're having a lot of administrative hearings, which then it holds the potential of having a lot more.
But there are already hearings scheduled currently, correct?
But there's hearings tomorrow, and there will be hearings Wednesday, and there's hearings scheduled all week this week.
Expulsion hearings.
No, administrative hearings.
Are there any expulsion hearings scheduled?
There's one scheduled for this week.
Yep. Okay.
But
So
I think
this panel would not be a part of that.
No.
hearing.
Just one.
So can I ask a question?
So I think part of this is also complicated by the fact that you currently don't have an executive assistant, right? Like there's the logistical complications. Is it the kind of thing that it would be helpful if everybody provided their calendars through the end of October? Like every single Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you know what I mean? So that, because I think part of what you're saying is like every time something new happens, we got to turn. And I'm to your proactivity point, like I can literally tell you when I'm available till Thanksgiving. Like I know that sounds bizarre, but I can. And the nights that I'm not available, I'm totally not available. I can tell you I'll cancel book club. This is you understand my point. Like this is a priority.
So there's two kinds of calendars. There's my normal one, and there's the one we have an emergency need, and I have to be willing to cancel something.
Yes.
I think long-term, Leanne, what you just described, if I had support, there would be someone who would call each one of you, and it would be maybe a 45-minute conversation, and that person's taking down dates.
I'll even make the doodle poll for everybody, you know.
But I think that's where we are. And so what you've seen is that we're doing these burst doodle polls of
6, 7, 8.
When do we have availability within the next few days? Yep. You're suggesting, no, let's do it out to mid-November. Yes, that's different.
And you commit. And so I'm not going to schedule anything on that night. I'm going to say, I might be able to do that church council, but
that's proactive.
I think that is proactive.
Priority.
And I think that is a bridge to us cleaning things up to a place where I know legal would feel better. And I think it would make listening to this conversation this evening, the board would be in a better foundational place as well.
Okay. So I commit to help you or Deborah or Ms. Hoppy figure that out for the next 3 days so that you have everybody's availability and we'll do the definitely not available.
Sure.
And then we'll decide if we want to have the maybe. I'd like to avoid the maybe.
Okay.
Motion to table.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any more discussion on motion to table?
All our board members. Yeah, I'm on the fence. I don't know. Mr. Phillips, what you think matters, or what you all think matters, but you've had the reservation, so.
I'm good with I like the proactivity, the proactive approach to this. Scheduling it kind of is like hybrid.
Okay.
The way I feel about it.
So to honor your concerns, this addresses your concerns.
It does.
That I've heard you.
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think you've addressed another concern that we haven't talked about, which is we had a very robust conversation about how the board's involved in this. And I think there's a perception that the board hasn't been part of it. I'm thankful that you've engaged me and tried to find ways where we can do this more effectively for kids and for our teams. So thank you.
Great. Dr. Means, could you call the roll on the motion to table?
Ms. Munfeld?
Yes.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Jessebanger?
Yes.
Dr. Hoig?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Willis?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for the conversation, everyone. And figuring out how to navigate this. This will likely be back.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Zelazowski. The second item.
Because we tabled and we didn't take a vote, we're not going to take public comment on that item. Thank you for the question, though. So that's a good one. Let me comment on that. Prior to the board taking a vote, an up or down, we would take public comment on action items. If we do not comment prior to the vote.
Next time.
Right. But for those folks who are in attendance who maybe want to give comment, you can absolutely submit it to public comment on the website. You're welcome to email me because I recognize you here.
Yeah.
Public comment?
It's working. It's just not up to date since Mary
We need to update it.
So what I would encourage community to do right now is to email the board directly as board members, and we'll receive it. The board will get the public comment, but there's a delay right now in passing that information on to the board.
Okay.
It's the same one.
Our next item under strategic goal number 5.
The other topic was
Sorry.
no. Okay, yeah.
Is an action item to approve the creation of Dean of Students positions at the districts for secondary schools. Ms. Fraley, this one is for you.
It is recommended that the high school, it is recommended that the school board approve the creation of a Dean of Student position at the district's 4 secondary schools, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm
Oh,
going
can I just mention if there's a presentation, I did stop sharing on the screen because it looked like it was done. So whoever's at the laptop may want to reshare that presentation if one exists.
It's the same one. As we're pulling up the presentation, there was a request to look at some of our data because I think we should be data driven if we're going to have this conversation. And as it's being pulled up, and we're so close. We're right there. So the first or the second and third column is data that we were able to pull this afternoon in regards to in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions thus far since the 26th. The fourth and fifth columns are data points that we had and we presented to the community as of mid-May last year. So those are data points from mid-May. I think those numbers actually went up over the course of the conclusion of the school year. But the reason why I wanted to share the data is because we're trending for the first month of the school year. And we haven't even completed the full month of September. We're trending where discipline's actually up. I would be remiss, and I'm looking at our fearless leader of our curricular assessment and instruction area. Dr. Marble would share with you that this is not a disciplinary recommendation that we're making to you this evening. When administrators, especially at the secondary level, are constantly dealing with behavioral issues that come to the office, that prevents them from getting into classrooms to do observations. So there's an unforgiving cycle that is happening where we're constantly reacting to behaviors from students. Our administrators who we want them to be instructional leaders are unable to help our instruction. The instruction isn't as engaging as it can be. And when instruction isn't as engaging as it can be, students will find ways to engage themselves. So there's this unforgiving cycle that continuously happens if we are not providing the type of support that our administrators need. Since I've arrived, I've heard teachers make the statement that they need help. And I think part of that help that they're seeking is having students addressed, their behaviors addressed immediately when those things emerge in the classroom, not in a punitive disciplinary perspective, but a dean of students can be very restorative in terms of coaching and teaching young people and helping them get back into the classroom situation. So I would just go to our next slide. And one thing that I would just point out in terms of what the dean of students can do, I really want to hone in on the first and third components of our vision statement, which is we want to ensure an exceptional student experience for every kid. And when a dean of students is able to support our schools, we have a greater opportunity to create those experiences. But we also have the ability to eliminate disproportionality. We know that when you look at our student discipline data right now, we are disproportionately identifying certain students. And so that's a concern. Again, I want to strike the balance this evening and share with you that while we're proposing this creation of a Dean of Students position, we are quickly looking to create more school psychologists and social worker positions with our CEIS money. I think it's Comprehensive Early Intervention Systems funds. We get those are federal dollars that we're able to receive. We actually have carryover funds from last year that we haven't utilized. And we're really excited about the ability of hiring people on the school psych and social work side of things. Now, I want to acknowledge there will be community members who will say, my goodness grief, why are you talking about social workers and school psychs? We just need you to discipline students. And that's what I mean by the balance that we're trying to strike. We want a restorative focused Dean of Students, not someone who's just going to simply discipline students, but help make in alignment with our school strategic plan, someone who's going to really focus on strategic objectives 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4 around creating more welcoming school environments. But at the same time, we need someone who can address acute issues as quickly as possible. We can't ignore the fact that we have acute issues in our schools. And I don't want to dismiss those acute issues. I think we have to address them, but I think we need to address them in a way that is not going to be just one-sided and just punitive only. I think there's a time and place for discipline, but we should always strive for balance. So I'll pause here. I think I've covered all my high-level points of, at the core, this is instructional. Because if we're looking to also improve what we're doing academically, the ability of our assistant principals and our principals to get into classrooms is really critical, because the more engaging instruction is, the less likely students want to deviate from that instruction. At the same time, we have teachers and administrators who are saying they need help. And that help could come in the form of a Dean of Students. There are other talking points I have, but I'll pause and see if you have any questions for me.
Any more comment or questions, Adam? Ms. Beethel.
Thank you. I don't know, talking in the microphone. I'm supposed to talk into the microphone. Is it better? I don't know, I feel like it's not working. Who does the Dean of Students report to at each school?
So we don't have deans of students right now.
Who would they?
The principal.
Okay, the principal. And do they have authority to coordinate the student experience, if you will? Do they have direct access to professionals at the school?
Yes.
Or how do they coordinate that? How are they going? Yeah, just help me understand that process.
So a Dean of Students is not an administrative position. They would still remain on a teacher contract. They would have, and then in the job description, we're very clear of, this is a person who's attending to school culture. They're the individuals who are helping with our positive behavior intervention systems. They're individuals who are, they're the face of ACAL. When you're at an ACAL meeting, or there are ACAL event at the middle school level, or they're the people who are an extra set of hands and eyes and ears at sporting events and co-curriculars. This individual has the ability to really lead a lot of our school culture initiatives of making the place, and when I say the place, to school, a more inviting, welcoming environment.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple follow-up questions. So in the school environment, do they, are they corresponding with the hall people?
Yes.
Or do they go into the classroom? I mean, I'm wondering if the principals and the assistant principals are overwhelmed. Well, wouldn't this position be overwhelmed if?
So everyone's going to be overwhelmed. This is not to. I don't want to over promise something here. I think the shifting of responsibility looks different. So instead of principals and associate principals being overwhelmed with both observation responsibilities and addressing acute behavioral issues, now you can shift some of those behavioral issues to the dean of students, which now a principal or associate principal has the ability to focus either on high level problems with behavior or get into classrooms more and become more visible with classroom observations. A dean of students cannot observe and evaluate a teacher. They are there to support teachers if there's a student who is consistently misbehaving in a classroom. They are there to give strategies and suggestions on how to work with a student who is a chronic problem. They are there to call the parents or the family of a student who is consistently not complying with rules. They're the person who is creating a bridge between the school and the counselor to make sure that that student is getting what they need. That's the role of a dean of students.
So would the dean of students be on call, say, if a teacher would send a student out of the classroom? Would they take the call, or
yes, they would.
What would happen?
So many of our schools, teachers have a walkie-talkie in the classroom. And so in essence, if teacher A says Mike is misbehaving in class, that call can go out to the dean of students. That means if you have a dean of students, the principal doesn't have to be the one to go to the classroom. It could be the dean of students. That's what I mean by the shift of responsibility.
And how will this happen consistently across the secondary schools? So that was in the disciplinary framework, that was, one of the key messages here was consistency. So
with the creation of a dean of students position, our director of student success, Ms. Emily O'Connor, will have an opportunity to build the capacity of our deans of students to ensure that they're being utilized the same way in all 4 secondary schools.
all right, one final question. So this is more of an example of how they coordinate within the school. What about their authority to coordinate with the district office, or is that going through the administration at the school?
There will be times where they would have to work with district staff, and they have the authority to do so. I think that's the one bonus I believe that emerges from this. We start to build a bench. We start to build people who have the ability or the interest of getting into administration. This is one of those hybrid moments where if you're thinking about administration, try to be a dean of students for a year or two. If you're still interested, then let's go all in. But if you're not interested, that's okay too. We're finding that the bench, the availability of people who want to get into administration is starting to dwindle. And so creating this position, I think that's an added bonus and benefit, I believe, to it.
Ms. Fraley.
Will the dean of students have any oversight of other school staff, school psych, school social worker?
Not oversight, not supervision, no.
Okay, so they're not going to be sort of like team lead to student services within a building?
That's just still rests with an administrator.
Okay. And so one thing I just share with the public is, this dean of students are very common in charter schools because it allows the principals or assistant principals to focus on instructional leadership, facility leadership, et cetera. I really like the Dean of Students role because I think ideally, to your point, it frees up space to focus on instruction, which is a huge priority for us. Like, as much as we're talking about human growth and development and fighting and all these things, like our job, Mike said it, you said it earlier, student learning, math, reading, like making sure that kids are becoming productive citizens. And for me, the Dean of Students allows a focus on school culture that translates into instruction, and not just school culture for students, school culture for the staff. And so I do want to make sure that we're very clear that as much as they are tasked with maintaining an orderly, safe environment, it's in the spirit of, creating spaces where kids can come and engage in their learning. Like it's not the assistant principal that I had in high school where you got sent to if you were in trouble. It's how are we building a productive culture of learning? So some of the questions that I have in terms of supervision you've answered, but in terms of authority. So does everything, like if they have a recommendation for what happens to a student, does that then have to go through multiple layers to become reality? Or do they have the authority to say, I met with Susie or Mike or whomever, and this is the, the consequence that I am providing them? I just want to make sure it's not slowing us down.
It won't slow us down, but they don't have the authority to suspend a student.
That I'm fine with.
Yes.
But in terms of
but when that recommendation goes to an associate principal or a principal, that is taken from the Dean of Students and applied by an administrator.
I'm fine with that. And in terms of recruitment for this role, tough time of year to be recruiting for this role.
Yes.
It is open to non-administrative. Like, I'd want to make sure that we didn't say it's only open to folks who have their admin license, et cetera. Have you thought at all about the timing of this and whether or not, I guess I'm going to be really frank. I don't want to get someone in the role that's fine versus the potential for this job is huge in terms of us turning around, I think, some of the challenges we're having to get at deep, thoughtful instruction that's rigorous, for all kids. And I think we need it now. I think it actually is something we probably should have hired for 4 months ago.
I would tell you that if we don't have the right candidates, we won't say yes to it.
Even if that means that some schools have it and some schools don't?
We need to have the right candidates in each school.
Okay. And does that mean that we would potentially be in a situation where we wouldn't hire, not every secondary school would have one? We only find 2 great candidates.
I think it goes along with, that's what we do with all of our positions.
Okay.
We want to get the best people.
Okay.
I believe that while it's an awkward time of year, it's still a good time of year because there will be teachers who are in programs who would like to venture into the world of administration, but not go totally in. This is a nice intermediate step into it. And I think we have a very appealing school system. I think there will be people who will say, I'm leaving my teaching position to become a dean of students.
So I just want to say that it breaks my heart. And I don't like to hear about any school professional that leaves in the middle of the year. Hear me out. Hear me out. And I want us to make sure, because this is going to be an appealing position if it were to pass for our own staff. And what I don't want is the next round of angry, frustrated emails for parents justifiably to be, you just pulled an amazing teacher out of my kid's classroom to do this. Again, it's a balance, but I want us, what's our plan?
And all I would say is that I was thinking of non-Wauwatosa school district teachers who see the posting.
But legally, you can't do that.
Sure we can.
You can say, we're not going to let our own people apply.
Well,
for
I didn't
stuff.
say that. I said I'm looking forward to us recruiting non-Wauwatosa staff. But if there are internal staff members who are interested in this position, I think we would work with Ms. Zelazowski and her team on the timing of it.
Okay.
So, for example, if we post now and someone says, I'm very interested, and it's an amazing teacher, maybe the transition starts for second semester or starts when we come back from winter break. It gives us the ability to go out and recruit and find the replacement before there's an actual switch.
And if I can just say that I would love for us to think about what that timing is for students. So after winter break is not before the end of the semester.
Correct.
So the student is my ultimate, constituent. And so let's just make sure that we're not, and it pains me to think we're disrupting it for students in another district as well. But obviously my priority is us.
Yes. Yes.
That's my question.
Mr. Meyer.
So, with respect to qualification or essential job function number 9, supervise the students on campus before and after school, monitor students during lunch, recess, passing periods, etc. I think back to long ago in my high school, we had the cafeteria, which was called the Commons, when it was not in lunch, and students could go there and just sit and talk. And I recall one of my teachers saying, well, there's one teacher in this building who will walk through the Commons casually during the day when they aren't in front of a classroom. That's the only teacher who is willing to do that because everybody else is worried that they'll see something they have to do something about. This was long ago, but I bet people are still people. So this person needs to be the one who would walk through the Commons and see all the stuff and know what to do and have the toolbox and the toolkit with the different responses that are not either 0 or 100 miles an hour, but different nuanced responses and referrals or activities. And sometimes actually, in a subtle way, do something about it, but formally not do something about it. As I talked about with speeding, it's like, do you a ticket for 26 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone? So this is a very sensitive leadership position, right? I mean, that's kind of the person you're looking for, the one who has the leadership qualities that the students will admire and follow and respect and be able to dole out mercy as is appropriate. Okay. The second thing is item 4, assistant development, implementation, evaluation of intervention programs. Would the Dean of Students actually be the informal referral hub to other professionals, such as social workers and psychologists, off-campus resources? Because it seems now there isn't a person who's the one who's really aware of all the children. And that's kind of their job, is to connect the student with the correct interventions and resources. I mean, sure, teachers do it, sure, building principals do it, but this would be the person who would have the full set of resource lists, contacts, and everything. Call the parents, your son here in the school, well, I'm seeing this going on and we want to help him, right? And would you consider calling this agency or these people or something? Is this that person?
Yes.
who can be the connective glue for all of the things and kind of shepherd the kids to the right help?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So most of my questions have been answered already, but obviously this is a position that the background and training and temperament of the person is really important.
Yes.
And we have 4 positions that we're looking to fill. And you're saying if we don't have the right people, we won't fill all 4. We're not going to take somebody who's not adequate for the role just to have a person. So how will we decide, let's say we hire 2, how do we decide where those 2 get deployed? I guess what I'm looking for is, rather than saying, my hope would be rather than saying you are applying for the East position, it's you are applying to be a dean of students. And then if we don't get all 4, I'm hoping we can more strategically deploy those resources where we think they're most needed.
We've actually gone through this process with our ESSER fund positions of the mental health specialists. That was a pooled interview process where the secondary schools worked together. In some cases, it was a competitive conversation on who gets this person because this is the star of the pool. That happens. And we do this routinely. Not only did we do it with the mental health specialists, but we do it at 3 elementary schools have to hire physical education teachers. We do the same thing. So this is not unusual.
Okay. And I know there's been Mr. Pinion's been talking about putting together sort of these crisis response teams that would, at the secondary level, that would respond to escalating situations in buildings. Would the dean of students be part of that team?
Absolutely.
Or lead that team?
And that's what I mean by us building our bench. This is now someone who's being exposed to a lot of different opportunities and learning experiences that if they choose to eventually move into administration, they can do it really quickly and well. What we're finding is that sometimes the associate principalship isn't affording people the ability to really step into that principal role. And that's because they're just overloaded with the disciplinary balance versus the instructional balance. And some administrators will say that they feel like they're not helping anything. They're not moving anything. They're simply, it's day to day. We want to create this assistance for those individuals, but we've spent a lot of time talking about administration and supporting administration. With all due respect to our administrators, I think the real component to this is helping teachers. And so if I'm a teacher and I have a challenge with a student, I need the ability to call someone immediately. And that doesn't happen all the time. If the administrators are out doing other things, their availability becomes tighter. If you have a dean of students who's flexible and can support those classroom teachers, that's what they're looking for. If you have a student who's wearing their hoodie and they have their head down and they're not compliant to your rules, you need to address that immediately. And I think that's when I listen to teachers, that's what they're calling for. When I listen to parents who are saying my child's in a classroom with 2 or 3 kids who behave that way, they want someone who's going to address those issues right away. And a dean of students can provide that support.
Most of my questions have been answered, so I really appreciate that conversation. I do have some questions around, is the need consistent among all schools? I mean, if you don't mind, Sarah, going back one slide to the data. I mean, I was surprised. I mean, we've clearly heard a call to action from Whitman and West families, teachers, and administrators. So I was surprised that some of the data is more consistent among all of the schools. So I want to know, like, is the need consistent among all 4 secondary schools? Like, do we need to more thoughtfully and strategically address some of the more acute issues in our district? Not saying that we don't, we're not considering the future of some of the other schools, but is there consistency among need across all 4 schools?
We're seeing that our most acute behavior, or if you wanted to call it our most dangerous behavior, is happening in our secondary schools. And so that's one foundational piece. The second is you can see that the data is fairly consistent across the secondary schools in terms of out of school suspensions.
did you misspeak? You said across the secondary schools, we're seeing the most dangerous behavior across all 4 secondary schools?
We see the larger the kids get, the more dangerous the things get for the secondary schools. So for both middle schools and high schools.
Okay, it's pretty consistent among both.
We have challenges. There are students who fight at the middle school level. There are kids who are disrupting instruction at the middle school level in addition to the high school level. And I think that's part of the frustration that staff and parents are expressing, in that they're saying, well, this kid was disrupting class in 6th grade, and he's disrupting class in 9th grade, and he's doing it again in 11th grade. Where's your action? What are you putting in place? And that's what I mean by the unforgiving cycle of our current structure isn't set up in a way for us to respond in a way that is immediate.
So to Dr. Hoyt's question, if we only get 1 or 2, how are we going to prioritize? Because I think that, and maybe I need to understand timing a little bit better. What is the anticipated timeline for hiring and implementing these positions in our schools?
If you approve this evening, we would post tomorrow.
And then will we prioritize where the dean of students go based on how, quickly we hire 1 or 2 or 3?
It would be like any other position we have. We would be very aggressive in our advertisement of it. There are certain educators in the metro area who have been deemed as up and coming stars in the profession, and we would talk to those people externally. There are people internally who have expressed interest in this type of work. We would talk to them. I think the concern of creating a pool, I'm not that concerned about it. I think there will be people who will be very interested in these positions. I'm cautious in saying, well, which of the 4 schools need the support more than others? I think all 4 of the schools need something to support our teachers and our students and our families. I think all 4 of our secondary schools can have environments that are more welcoming and restorative in nature. And I think that's what these positions would do. And I don't want to lose the opportunity. I'm sorry, Ms. Willis, but it's interesting. Longfellow has a pilot program in place right now where they have identified teacher leaders and they call them deans of students. And so Dr. Larson has used his building funds to identify team leaders among the grade levels. So if something happens in teacher A's classroom in the 7th grade dean of students is the person who responds unless it's an acute situation, and that's when they call administration. So, and if you talk to Dr. Larson, he will tell you it's been successful. People feel that they have immediate support when there are things happening in their classrooms.
So considering that many of these folks may not have any type of experience in leadership or even in discipline, what does a training schedule look like? Because I know we've prioritized, some things that align very closely with our strategic plan. So what does the training look like so that we are doing this with fidelity and intentionality, and we're not, we're equipping them with the proper tools to handle these, behaviors that we're seeing in our schools?
Great question. Been waiting on that one. Miss Emily O'Connor is our current director of student success. Miss O'Connor, prior to coming to us this school year, was one of the lead trainers for the Response to Intervention Center for the state of Wisconsin, who trained in these spaces as a former social worker and someone who worked in our district and has a history of our district. She understands very well what type of training not only do a group of dean students would need, but our administrators would need.
And my last question, we've talked about, this dean being available to teachers and families. What about the community at large? I mean, I think we've heard some super creative ideas on how to combat some of these behavior issues that, are going to take some time to put into place. But, is there an opportunity for maybe even the dean to engage in conversations with community members that, have some real interest and creating some creative ideas to address these behavioral issues that we're seeing?
I think the dean, among many people are available to work with our community, to work with some of the mentoring programs that we're looking into and releasing an RFP around. I think having another layer of support for all of those different constituencies is important. But yes, the dean can definitely be part of that work.
So I guess what I'm getting at, and I don't really understand the CEIS funds, right? So I'm trying to think about how sustainable this position is. Like, is this something we're looking at short term or long term, or, are we gonna, if we're, because we're clearly designing this to address some of the behavioral issues, but if we can find creative ways and more sustaining systems to put into place that maybe these dean of student positions don't need to be there anymore. I guess that's what I'm.
Well, so strategic objective 5.2 is to establish criteria for recognizing significant contributions by students for creating and cultivating positive, safe, inclusive, warm, welcoming learning environments. And we have metrics that you're supposed to measure under the strategic plan. If these teams of students are doing their jobs appropriately, we'll see those numbers increase. 5.3 as a strategic objective is all schools will decrease unexcused absences and habitual truancy rates. 5.4 is decrease student school suspensions by ensuring each school adheres to the behavioral guidelines set forth by the district. I think there are ways for us to measure the return on investment of this position.
Thank you.
Is there any community comment on this item prior to the board voting yes?
Hi, my name is Julie Peterson from Wauwatosa. I have a question and then kind of an observation. If you wouldn't mind going back to the vision, I'd appreciate that.
One thing is, so in your 3 minutes, it's not a question and answer period.
No.
You are able to comment or kind of share anything, but we don't get into a question and answer or kind of debate.
That's okay. Can I still ask my question?
For sure.
Okay. Just if somewhere there's a direction of where discipline issues have increased over the last maybe 10 years, that'd be cool. So the reason I ask is because we're going on a 10-year now of a slow ramp of social emotional learning. And the vision statement is directly under the umbrella of SEL. And I believe that slow ramp up until probably 20 was maybe you saw some benefits to that. But since 2020, we have skyrocketed. This would be considered radical SEL. And my question is, are you taking what has caused the problems and making it bigger by implementing more staff to supplement and teach more SEL? That's my observation. So what we don't want to do is say in the last, maybe we can just say 2 years, with the increase of SEL and how radical it's getting, problems have developed in disciplinary issues across the schools, and we're just going to add more and more and more. And my question is, how many kids are you willing to experiment this radical approach and getting back to teaching what I heard you say? That's your focus. You want to teach the kids. We can't teach the kids and spend 40% of the day in SEL. We need 100% on fundamentals of learning. So thank you for your time. And I just want to know, hopefully you guys can think about, as you move forward, what are we doing here? And are we teaching the kids, or are we indoctrinating the kids? Thank you.
Is there any online comment?
Yeah, we do have one. Deb Falk-Palak, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Hi, good evening, Deb Falk-Palak. I like what I heard happening with Dr. Larson over at Longfellow. And it does make me wonder, do we need 4 people? Maybe if what he's doing over there with his team, we only need 3 people. Could this be replicated, what he's doing in other buildings? Because it sure sounds like what was presented was positive, what he's come up with. I do like Mrs. Willis's question about the sustainability, the financial sustainability of this, where we have, what did we call it? A surplus of funds from last year, but how would this transfer into beyond this year? And then under number 11 in the job description, where it talks about participating as needed in IEP meetings, I do have some questions about this because I'd like to know, or somebody to ask about this, what would the training be for a person to be participating in an IEP meeting? When would they be coming in? And for what reasons would they be the LEA in the meeting? So where's the training on that to ensure that that person knows what they're doing in a legal meeting like an IEP meeting? Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no more hands raised.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments from the board before we move to take a vote?
I would like to ask a question. Would they have the authority, the dean, to act as an LEA?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I didn't think so, but I just wanted to address that and clarify that.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Means, please call the roll.
Ms. Muenfeld,
Yes.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Anger,
Yes.
Dr. Hoy,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Ms. Willis.
Yes.
The position passes. Best of luck in the recruitment process.
Ms. Elizoski will do a great job.
Next up on our agenda is strategic goal number 6, operations. First is discussion on recommended revisions to purchasing procedures and district's policy in response to the CLA audit.
Mr. Brightman, who is our CFO, has been doing a great job in establishing a lot of foundational structures that the CLA audit demanded that this board and our district put in place. He's here to speak to some of the policies. Again, we're talking policy, some policy recommendations that he has and other structural work that he's put in place. Mr. Brightman.
Thank you. Yeah, good evening. So giving an update on the CLA audit report that was furnished to the board last March, I believe it was, and relayed around purchasing policies and procedures and internal controls within the business office and the district at large. So tonight I'm going to go through, and I did kind of the write-up in the executive summary in board docs, so you can see the content of what I'll talk about. I'll go through each one of the finding areas, talk about what we've done to date and what we have as far as next steps and what we're still working on within that. So if you look at kind of the center of the executive summary, the specific finding areas, the first one is standard operating procedures, and that one was looking at having internal policies, but also our procedures, and then also having board policies aligned to the recommendations. I did put some example draft policy updates in board docs also, and policy 6320 is the policy that centers around purchasing that has the most edits to it. 6460, 6440, and 6470 are also included in board docs, and they have very minor changes. But 6320 would be updated based on the recommendation. The policies would go to the policy committee, possibly to a finance committee if that's formed, and then back to the board for approval at some point in the future. We're also updating internal operating procedures, and we're aligning those with federal grant requirements. The federal grant requirements are very stringent. They have uniform grant guidance that we follow for all federal grants, and if we align to that with our internal procedures, we're covered on every base. As part of our annual audit process, there's what's called a single audit, and that's looking at all the federal programs and making sure we're aligned to all those federal procedures. So if we can align to that, we're in good shape with what we do locally also. The second one was set up a maintenance process. We right now have set up a process where the director of finance reviews all new vendor setups, as well as changes to vendors to make sure that our accounts payable staff can't create a fictitious vendor or anything like that within the system. So there's a cross-check and validation that's happening through that. So we've already put that into place. The delegation of authority policy, again, 6320, outlines what the clarity is on board policy and purchasing decisions. And we try to clean up a little bit of the language and make it a little bit less ambiguous from the past policy language to what's recommended. And then we've instituted a formal approval hierarchy that's within our software itself. And so there's a much more structured approach to someone that initiates a purchase, and there's an approval chain that happens, and anything over a certain threshold then goes through additional hoops within the system to have it approved. We also want to make sure that no one person within our system has the ability to initiate a purchase and then approve a purchase. That just is never good practice, or eliminating all of that ability within our system as we look forward. That's one of our next steps, but we'll be getting there. The Skyward delegation of authority and approval controls, again, aligning with our new policy language and recommended policy language. We do have the hierarchy reviewed and we deemed it adequate to provide our necessary protections. So we did have something in Skyward. We're not building from nothing. But the thing that we did have was called super users, and we had about 20 people in the system that could access any aspect within the financial software. So we're locking that down to provide that access only to a few people currently, and eventually we'd like to have no one have that system-wide access and have the cross checks within that. But it'll take a little bit of time for us to get there, because you have to build kind of mini module users within the system first before you can take away all of those rights under the super user category. Employee cross training is another finding that they had, and that we didn't have sufficient and adequate backups in case our main payroll person went down for whatever reason. We need to have someone in place that can take that role and be able to work through those types of areas, as well as in our accounts payable systems. We do have 4 of the 7 positions in our business office brand new as of June 1st. So it'll take us a little time to gear up to our current jobs, and then we'll cross train on the other positions that we also have. But we can commit to have that all in place by June 30 of 2023. There's a missing 3, it looks like, on the write-up. As we look to what we've done so far, going up to the top of the executive summary. So we have revised and clarified some language where needed to those policies that I mentioned. We'll be taking those to, again, a policy committee structure, and then probably back to the full board for review at that point. We've reviewed and updated the purchasing approvals and controls and that vendor setup within our accounting software. We've updated and we continue to refine the internal purchasing procedures in alignment, again, with the federal grant guidance. One thing that I've shared with Dr. Means is a calendar for what a potential finance committee would look at. And one of the items on that calendar would be a committee review of our alignment to federal purchasing requirements. So that'll be part of a future process that we put into place. And then we've committed to that formal cross-training of AP and payroll positions by June 30 of 2023. Any questions up to that point?
I have one. Yes. Where does division of duties show up in policy anywhere? Like the person that writes checks can't reconcile, and things like that to help protect us. Is that in there anywhere? I didn't see it.
It is not in there currently, but we can definitely add something like that.
Yeah.
Another piece that I'd like to add, and it's not in there yet, is the addition to 6.8, where we have vendors. We talked about earlier in the meeting, giving access to our students to do mentorships and shadowing, that kind of thing. So it's another thing we'd like to add prior to going to the policy committee. So
I've seen that. I think I sent that back with both the RFP process and then our vendor evaluation process to have that as part of our rubric and scorecard for this. Yeah. Good. Okay. Cool.
Mr. Martin, is this the right time to talk about the spending limit cutoffs?
It's draft language. It's really up to the board which aspects to talk about. I attached the policy drafts to show we've made some progress in that regard. I can speak real quick the rationale for the 85,000.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments that I think would be useful now, but I'd first like to hear the rationale for the 85,000.
Yeah, it was to set a benchmark or a limit to that aligns to our budget. And that's 0.1% of our overall $85 million budget. So that's where we landed on the $85,000 threshold.
Okay. So my comments are these. The 85,000 seemed high. Now I see what you've explained what the logic is. It still seems a little high but I have some qualifications to that. If it's a matter of first approval, like a new vendor for a new program, yes, I would think that number would be lower. Or, and the alternative, if we had a new vendor, a new program, the amount would go on the regular agenda, not to the consent agenda. But once we've had the full program description, if there's a high amount for renewal in subsequent years, well, if there haven't been any significant changes to the program and we have history to it, we put in the consent agenda that, yes, we approved the same amount 2 years ago and reference back to this discussion on this date, and this is the renewal. Then I don't, at least for my opinion, I don't need to see the whole discussion all over again. So there'd be a way to construct things as far as not just that the board approves, but whether it's okay to have it on the consent agenda. And over time, we've had board members who say, oh, this big of a dollar amount, it should never be on the consent agenda. We should talk about it. Well, to honor that thought, sure, but it's different if we've approved this in prior years and we already know about it. So why beat it around on the regular agenda again? Okay. I think a serious problem we have in our conceptualization of this, compared to a place where I used to work, approvals would not be just for the vendor cost. Approvals would be for the project cost. So if I had $40,000 in vendor costs and I was going to have $300,000 in training costs to go with it, staff time and all this stuff, well, the approval would be for the 340. It wouldn't be for the 40. So if you have a $40,000 purchase, that's just a flat out, no collateral expenses cost purchase. To me, that's different from a $40,000, say, license on a teaching tool. And now we have to spend $300,000 in staff time training. I really want to know that the 340 program cost rather than the 40. Now, I don't know how you construct that, but that in substance, I think that does matter, because then we look back and say, oh yeah, we approved that. It was $30,000 for this tool. And then we see, yeah, but there's like training going on in all 9 elementary schools. And it's, taking 3 days per teacher or something, well, we need to know that we committed to that as a board to pin down our teaching resources for all kinds of training stuff. That does matter to me. So just those thoughts out there for when this gets wordsmithed. Thanks.
One additional thought. You brought up a good point when you mentioned the percentage. It may be good to put that in there because budgets ebb and flow. And so that we wouldn't have to go back and revisit that on an annual basis to say, oh, that's this year is this. Just post the index so that you know.
Yeah.
And you said this level set at 0.1% of our budget.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I caught that. Thank you.
Nice work.
And then just to wrap up, so next steps also listed on board docs, but really start to initiate and utilize the policy committee of the board to go through. I took notes tonight and we'll update based on the feedback. But bring it to the policy committee. The policy committee will review the policies, obviously, and make sure they're in alignment with that committee's thinking, and then bring it back to the full board for review and potential action. We'll provide annual training on the purchasing policies to our executive leadership team on at least a biannual basis, if not more frequently than that, especially as we initiate new policy revisions as they're approved. Continue to improve our segregation of duties and document the internal purchasing practices to align with both our local policies that are approved by the board as well as the uniform grant guidance of the federal government. We'll cross-train our business office, AP, accounts payable, and payroll staff key responsibilities. Complete annual internal audits of purchasing and payroll key functions, which includes new employees, new vendors, reviewing payroll and AP samples, that kind of thing internally prior to our annual financial audit. And we'll formalize a report out structure with our potentially upcoming Finance and Operations Board Committee We'll do additional accountability calendar items, we'll call it for now, of things that we look at least annually with that committee to make sure we're still in compliance with all the things that we said that we would be doing. So those will be the next steps with keeping pace with the recommendations of the findings.
So I look forward to kind of moving this into the policy committee and kind of continuing to move forward with this. It'll come back to the board for a readout and then a final decision. What I would recommend for the board members to do, this would be a great time to check in with Mr. Brightman to kind of share perspectives. And if you've got some specific items and so on, this is a great kind of time to shift feedback. And thank you very much for your report.
So I don't have a specific item, but just as an example. So let's say we've never owned a van, and now we're going to buy a van that has to be capable for people with disabilities. So the first time we ever buy a van, if you were to say, well, 0.05% purchasing policy has to come on the board. But if it's a repurchase of something we conceptually we've all agreed we want to have, then I would see a higher, the 0.1 or even a 0.22. If it's conceptually new, I would think we'd more want to bring it to the board. If it's a renewal or a replacement of an existing concept, I don't think I need to see that every time. And you could even go higher in my perspective on that.
I think the board has proven that we lack the capacity to thoughtfully address buying a van.
Sorry.
Purchasing a van.
We already did that.
Ms. Bufeld.
Thank you, Mr. Brightman.
Yeah.
My question for you is the work instructions. So the policy work that you're undergoing, and how will these work instructions be published for the staff to create consistency and also to provide training? So will they be in the form of administrative guidelines or combination of different sources? What is your recommendation?
Yeah, in the past, I've had a structured system, and actually just in Google Docs, you can have a separate folder set up where you have the federal compliance documents, you create your own procedures aligned to those requirements, and then you share those out with the staff that need to access those. There are also training materials involved in that. You can do slide decks with some of the training, and you just make sure that is something that you target as often as needed to remind people of those procedures and where to find the information when they need it.
And then as these policies are updated, those procedures are captured and revised, correct?
Correct.
And how will we circle back and make sure that everyone is trained? Will they have to sign something that they are trained, or?
Yeah, we would have the training directed foremost to the people that are within our system and have full authority. Those are the ones we want to make sure know all of the rules or vetting the purchases prior to getting to our point. But we'd also want to have all staff training, or those that are initiating purchases training in the different areas. So we would definitely have that as part of our planning.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Fraley.
One quick comment, just to say that the year at a glance and key accountability items just made my heart sing. And I'd love to see something like this for each of the different key areas. Yeah, no, like this is something that honestly, as I think about Dr. Hoig and as well as like to come in as a new board member and see this and be like, oh, that's when these things are happening, or that's when I'm going to get this data, or the fact that you said you were going to come back in September and give us an update, and you came back in September and gave us an update. I think it's really hard for the public to understand the sheer volume of items that come before us and come across our desks. And it's wonderful. So thank you for being so crisp and clear, and it's super helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, I found that to be a great tool, and we'll definitely implement that as we move forward.
Our second item underneath strategic goal number 6 is financial reports for July, August 2022.
Okay. Yes, tonight we have the combined report, and we did that because the way that we do our year-end accruals and then we undo those accruals, it looked kind of funny when we looked at last July compared to this July, just a different timing of what we did. So we combined the two reports. It's very early in the fiscal year, so when you look at the reports, there's really not there to look at. I did want to highlight a couple things. First on page 4-2, that's the page that shows our purchases over the purchasing threshold that we put out. And the top line shows a vendor payment to Associated Bank of just over $9.2 million, so a large dollar amount. And just to clarify, that is, we use Associated as our paying agent for our fall or our September 1 debt service payment on the capital referendum debt that we have. And so it's a payment to them, and then their paying agent, they pay the bondholders through a third party that way. But that's what Associated Bank line item is. We also did work to present the financial report with some clarified language to it, a little bit less technical, and we'd like feedback as we move forward on additional things we can do to make it more just kind of non-education speak, non-financial speak as you look at those documents, but yet provide the clarity that we need within those documents. So give us feedback if you're reading those and you'd like some further clarity with those. But other than that, really we're tracking as expected. It's very early in the fiscal year. I'm used to doing this more on a quarterly basis than a monthly basis. So there isn't much to report typically on a monthly basis, but we'll highlight things as they come through this first year and then decide if it's more of a quarterly report or a monthly report as we look forward.
Mr. Bryman, can you speak to the third Friday count numbers and your final determination on how we close the financial year of 21-22?
Yeah, so that's part of the beauty of both the accountability calendar as well as the budget calendar and process that we discussed at the last meeting. The third Friday count was not this last Friday, but the Friday before that. And so internally we do an official count that's completed and then validated and rechecked and revalidated. And the reason we do that is it's critical to our revenue authority for the current school year as well as feeding future school years. The second Friday count happens in January, and there's a reconciliation that happens between the third Friday in September and the second Friday in January. We have to account for every student and the differences for every student. So we want to make sure we set up this count to be in good shape for the second count. Both of those counts are fully audited as part of our annual financial audit, as well as through a membership audit that we sometimes get selected for. Talked to Dr. Beans that this year I'd actually like to request our auditors to do a membership audit, regardless of us getting the request from DPI or not. I think it just helps us all to identify any gaps we may have in the system, if there are any. We're hoping there aren't any. We've had success in the past with those audits, so I'm not expecting to find that. But I think it's a good grounding exercise for the new team as we look forward to make sure that we're fully utilizing our internal expertise the way we should to do the counts appropriately on the front end. So.
One comment. I like how you compare to the prior year, but if there's the ability to do a year-to-date budget against the year-to-date actual instead of the entire year budget against the year-to-date actual, I think that would also help too. It's cool to see against the prior year to see any major deviations, but if you have a budget in flux, it would also it'd be helpful to see how they're comparing to like the current budget. I don't know if you can slice and dice it that way. I know it's tough, but
I have not done that. I could definitely look at that. What we could do is look at more of the 3 to 5 year trend line versus the year over year. That might give a little bit more of a balance to it or long-term approach to it.
It's kind of like seeing that budget year to date versus actual year to date. But if we can't do it.
But I can think through that. I can look at it.
All right, cool.
Question aligned with that, I think. So another place I worked at had an end of year unused funds sweep. And if you weren't in the original budget, you knew that there was this time frame where you could come and propose project later in the year and try to get some of that unused money. Before your time here, because of the requirement to never short-term borrow, we had generous budgeting and annual positive variances. And we had a similar kind of thing, a sweep thing, where at the end of the year, because we had to have those variances built in order to reduce the risk of short-term borrowing, we would always have, tantamount to always, money to spend for capital type of spending. And we didn't plan on that capital spending for sure, because, you know, what if the variances don't turn out? So is there some way to register that in here as well? If you're going to operate the same way, that's your decision, of course, as business manager, how you budget with the variances or whatever, or maybe you have a reserve pool or something like that. So just to throw that out there, that because the board, I believe, always got this idea that the streets were paid, myself included, we never ran out of money and we could always just vote yes on everything. Well, there was things the business office did so that we felt like we could always vote yes on everything, but the road to that yes vote on a purchase at the end of the year was created by the budgeting practices, you know, leading up to that point. So and then we got a new business manager, and that business manager didn't want to budget with positive variances planned. Business manager wanted to just put it right to the dollar. And my feedback to that was, well, you better tell the board you're doing that because it's a different paradigm than we had in the past. So can you share with us how you look at it and how you know, is the budget for real? No risk, margin in there, or how do you do it?
Well, I'll always want to be somewhat conservative in the way we set our revenues and the way we set our expenditures to have a surplus at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay.
More often than not. At the next board meeting, kind of foreshadowing the next meeting, we're going to give the board a full rundown of where we ended the last fiscal year and where we saw budget surpluses and deficits and how they reconcile together and what the year end looked like. We thought that would be good timing with the board approving the next year's budget at the second meeting in October with the updated information we get on October 15th. But prior to that, having the board equipped with understanding the surpluses and variances that we had this last year.
You operate from the planned surplus model as well, because you almost have to, otherwise, or you have a reserve pool. Otherwise, you're at risk of short-term borrowing.
Well,
Not necessarily, but
because I don't think Mr. Brightman and I have talked about philosophy and strategy, and I think what I heard you describe was that that surplus was then earmarked for projects toward the end of the fiscal year.
Right, because we knew it was probably going to come.
I think I think his process is one in which the board will have an opportunity to weigh in on how those surplus funds are leveraged, and so that budget development process, I think it will be more clear.
Transparent, I think, is the word I'd like to use.
I tried to avoid transparent.
End of the year. That you'll be aware that we were leading into a surplus position, or we had some things come up that we, funded, like the 14 students positions. If we fund those, that could put us in a deficit position for the current year. Yeah. But that would be intentional to look at it.
Well, it wasn't a nefarious secret. We all knew that was how it worked. And I would explain that to the community, that this is how we do it. So, there'd be that collection of the unused funds at the end of the year. Just so you explain it to us, because we have new board members, you're all new. How are we doing this? So we really explicitly know, please, you can't assume we understand how you construct it as you approach it. Yeah, thanks.
Any community comment on this item?
Barb Shane here, 1324 North 74th Street. While I appreciate that there's a benchmark being utilized of 0.1% in practice of budget management and looking at 3 to 5 years out, it's actually death by 1,000 cuts. And when I'm saying that, it's not to be alarmist, but the city of Wauwatosa actually has a $50,000 cap on those expenditures. When you end up from 20,000 to 85,000 and then compound that by multiple decisions, that has an impact of the death by 1,000 cuts. And we're looking at budget outlays, from 3 to 5 years. We have to anticipate those things, and it actually creates a structural weakness in budget management over time being the thought. The proposal of 0.05% brings it more into line with about a $40,000 to $45,000 benchmark, which accounts for inflation more practically, versus this huge jump. I'm not liking the latitude that's possible. I love the idea that the superintendent has the latitude to spend on expenditures. We've seen the $10,000 valve that caused the $1 million water damage. We never want to repeat that. Just because it was good practice doesn't mean it made sense. So my thought would be the 0.5% being the better number to go with instead of this high number. Otherwise, you're going to have problems 3 to 5 years down the road. The city, we saw opportunities even when it went up to 50,000, suddenly there was this plethora of stuff all coming in and a lot of budget expenditures that did not have the adequate oversight, budget overrides of projects that suddenly went willy-nilly. And I think that oversight, even though it's a little more work, I would suggest, for those expenditures that are repetitive and okay, do a line item, like a line item vote that you read it and you're okay with it. Makes it short and sweet, to the point, gets the job done, but still lends you that oversight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, John McBooth, 772 North 116th Street. I am absolutely stunned. We are asking that the district would even ask for, or this board would even consider, a 450% increase in spending without accountability, essentially. What we are doing here is we are essentially allowing authorization for spending up to $80,000 without community oversight, without coming before this board, and without clear transparency as to why that is being done. With a board and a district that's had some issues regarding transparency issues over the past couple of years, this is something that we do not want to consider. Again, as Michelle pointed out, the entire city of Wauwatosa has a $50,000 spending limit before it does have to come to the council. And yet we are considering here at the school board level an $80,000. Something this huge should go before the taxpayers as a referendum to make sure that the transparency and accountability that needs to be had is had before this body. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments online, Jamie?
There are no hands raised.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Is there any final public comment on any items on our agenda or not on our agenda this evening? Seeing none in the room, Jamie, is there any online?
There are no hands raised.
Bring it back to the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C for the purpose of discussing the superintendent's evaluation?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Mills. Dr. Means, please call the roll.
Ms. Beanfield,
Yes.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Anger,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Willis.
Yes.
Let's take 10 minutes and we'll come back.